Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian. I'm back with another episode of Grief to Growth. I've got with me today Rose Ringer, and Rose has a very interesting tale to tell, so I can't wait to have a conversation with her. I'm going to introduce Rose. Rose's husband committed suicide at their home, and when that happened, she fell into a pit so deep and dark that medical professionals expressed doubts that she'd ever recover. And then 2 years after her husband took his life, Rose was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. And doing a related minor medical procedure, in quotes, because we know how those go, she bled to death and had no heartbeat for more than 10 minutes. In heaven, her predominant emotion was profound gratitude that this life experience had ended, but the angelic being she encountered encouraged Rose to return to earth. And she was told that if she agreed to go back, she would be restored to perfect health, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And then after that, several medical tests confirmed that all the angel's promises were accurate. Soon after she was discharged from the hospital, Rose implemented a detailed plan to sell all of her possessions, her home and her car, close her business, donate a lifetime of research materials, and move 1,000 miles west to start a new life. And Rose now lives with her little dog, Teddy, in the Midwest, where they like to spend their time quietly admiring the breathtaking beauty of the wide open spaces. So I want to welcome you, Rose, to Grief to Growth. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we met, I guess it was just a few weeks ago. We were on a panel of IANDS talking about grief and
Yes.
loss and recovery from that. So you have recovered from quite, a couple of things that are just totally devastating or would be to most people. So if you would, just tell your story and however you'd like to, and start wherever you'd like to start.
Okay. Well, I guess the starting point would be April 2016. My husband, who was I thought the answer to a lifetime of prayers, somebody I loved very deeply and never took for granted a day of our lives together, came home for lunch one day in April 2016, sat down in a chair and put a gun in his mouth and ended his life. And I have always been a writer. I've been a writer for 30 years, everything from newspaper reporting to books. I've written 9 books. I'm extremely sensitive, and as you probably know, life for a sensitive soul is kind of hard on this earth, not an easy place to be.
Yes.
And the last 4 words my husband articulated on this earth were, "This is your fault." He had sent me that as a text. So that was, I can't even say it was a twist of the knife. It was devastating, beyond devastating. So I lost my mind. Back in the day, we called it a nervous breakdown. I don't know what we'd call it today. And one of the things I discovered is obtaining psychiatric help, or mental health care even, I should say, is very difficult. My children immediately were on the phone trying to find some help for me, because I was I was probably on the cusp of a psychotic break. The pain was just more than I could bear. And the soonest we could find an appointment, I think, was 5 weeks away, which for somebody who was then living in 5-minute increments,
Exactly.
and that's what I did. I would say to myself, just get through 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Get through the next 5. 5 weeks felt like 1,000 years away.
Yeah.
And ultimately, a friend who is a mental health care worker pulled some strings and got me in to see a mental health care worker within hours. But that shouldn't be the way it is. But again, I don't want to digress. So after his suicide, I was in pretty bad shape. I became addicted to alcohol and prescription drugs. It turns out when your husband does this, they will give you all the benzodiazepines that you can use. I would get prescriptions of 90 count Ativan or Valium or both as often as I wanted them.
Wow.
So there was a day that I was probably doing, I don't know, 8 to 10 a day plus drinking, which is not wise. Benzodiazepines and alcohol are a very bad combination. And I just continued in a downward spiral. After the funeral, I never spent the night in that house again. And, different friends in the kindness of their heart tried to take me in, but I was almost like a wounded animal. I could not find comfort anywhere. I couldn't get comfortable. So for a short time, I actually lived out of my car. My husband was a litigator. So, this is, this is quite a thing for us to go from being this couple that here I have written several books and had some success in the writing world,
Yeah.
married to this prominent attorney, and now I'm living out of my Camry. Um, and a friend, again, a very sweet friend on the periphery of my life stepped in and said, "You're getting too comfortable in that car. You're coming home with me." And I said, "No, I'm not. You don't know. I scream in the middle of the night. I can't sleep. I pace. I sleepwalk. I'm a mess." She said, "Let's try it for one night." And that was brilliant, because one night I thought, all right, she's been a sweet friend. I can do this for one night.
Mm.
And I stayed with her for 4 months. And then I rented a small home in a nearby city and I actually had a friend live with me there, because I was still not able to care for myself when I lost a tremendous amount of weight, which is so typical. I was living on those liquid nutrition drinks. I couldn't swallow, I couldn't do solid food.
Mm.
So that's how my life went. And then after a couple of years, I asked my friend I told him I was ready to live on my own. And about 29 months later, I was out in the yard doing some work and pulling a bag of gravel across the yard. Actually picked it up to hoist it, and I felt something happen internally. And I'd had some symptoms. I'd been having a low-grade fever. I'd been spotting. A lot of. I knew something wasn't quite right. Anyway, they diagnosed me with cervical cancer.
Mm.
And they sent me on to an oncologist, and the oncologist at his preliminary exam, he said, it's at stage 2. He said, I can already see it spread to nearby flesh. And he said, it's advanced to a point where your flesh is distorted. And I just got plunged right back into the worst grief. I thought, wow, what now? What next? And then it was during a cervical biopsy, which he performed to determine exactly how far this had spread. And after I woke up from that, they in the hospital, they asked me to get up and go to the bathroom, get myself together, and I did. And I came out of that bathroom and said, I'm bleeding profusely.
Mm.
And I'm 59 years old at this point, and the RN was very dismissive. She said, oh, once you get home, lie down, you'll be fine.
Oh, wow.
So 3 times total, I told her, this cannot be normal. I'm losing a tremendous amount of blood, but they sent me home anyway. And within an hour at home, I had my friend who'd come home with me call 911. I realized I was bleeding to death, and they transported me to a nearby ER in Virginia. They have these little standalone ERs that are not affiliated or connected with the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I was taken, and they were out of their element. And they stuffed me with gauze like a Christmas goose, thinking all that did was stop the mess. It turns out it didn't stop the bleeding.
Mm.
So I continued to bleed and nobody knew it. So they were satisfied that, well, I don't see any blood, we'll leave her. And my buddy, his name is Milton, he sat by my side at that gurney faithfully, and he said he looked up, and I passed out pretty quick. They had given me some Dilaudid for pain,
Wow.
which turns out is kind of contraindicated for somebody with plunging blood pressure. I think that just kind of greased the skids. I don't know if that really caused my death. He said at one point he looked up, the medical staff had walked out of the ER. He said at one point he looked up at the blood pressure cuff, which was one of those blue machines on a stick, and my blood pressure was 32/25.
Oh, wow.
Which it's not a lot.
Yeah.
And,
I'm assuming you weren't conscious at this point.
I was not conscious.
Yeah.
And he said at that point, he was getting ready to get up and go get a doctor. And at that point, my eyes popped open and I reached up to heaven. He said, I tried to sit up on the gurney, which is pretty impressive for somebody with a blood pressure that's 32/25.
Yeah.
But I sat up, I tried to sit up on the gurney, lifted my head and shoulders and stretched out my arms and reached to heaven.
Wow.
And he said, you talked to somebody only you could see. You said you wiggled your fingers almost like a child reaching up for their father.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, after that, I flopped back on the gurney. Blood pressure went to error, which meant it was probably lower than 32/25.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, I was having a great time. I was unconscious at the moment of my death, but I woke up when my heart stopped.
Wow.
And boy, did I wake up. I woke up it's so, I know this sounds out there. I do believe our near-death experiences are customized for us.
Hmm.
But in mine, it was as though there was a silvery, sinewy cord from the crown of my head to the bottom of my feet, to my heel. And like an archer's bow, like somebody had pulled way back on it and popped and released. And I went, boy, I was catapulted out of that body like toast out of a toaster. It was,
Hmm.
I woke up, I feel this catapult, and I was literally just sailing through the air, floating further and further away from my body.
Wow.
And it was great. And my first thought was, my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And the next thing, I was just floating further and further away in this blackness. And my next emotion was gratitude, because I realized I still had my intellectual curiosity, my intellectual intensity.
Hmm.
I thought, I remembered how this had all happened, and I thought, wow, I bet nobody was expecting this.
Wow.
When they, stuffed me and walked out of the room, aren't they going to be surprised? And I remember gratitude, relief. I had
Yeah.
struggled with suicidal temptations dramatically. In fact, looking back at my journal, gosh, not 10 days before this happened, I had written in my gratitude journal, I did not kill myself today. That's a win.
Yeah.
God, please remove these devilish temptations from my soul. So I had been fighting the
Wow.
urge to end my life even up to days before this happened. And frankly, I was really probably relying on human will more than anything spiritual. And I was running out of road. I
Mm.
really was. So my feeling was, I did it. I pulled it off. No one's going
Yeah.
to blame me. There's not going to be the guilt, the horror, the rest of it. I'm done. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, I was just so relieved. I truthfully and honestly felt as though I'd been granted early release for good behavior. I
Yeah.
was just so free to be out of that misery. And I remembered this oncologist had me scheduled to start chemotherapy and daily radiation, I think the next week. And
Mm.
I thought, we're
Don't you do
done.
that? Yeah.
We're not going to have to worry about that one.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that my memory was still so strong. In fact, I'm in ham radio, which you have to. I'm an extra, which means you got to take a lot of tests and know a little bit about electronics. But it really felt like somebody had just put 100,000 amps through a 60 amp service. I felt so alive. I had the clearest, greatest mental acuity I have ever experienced.
Hmm.
That was just so cool. I think the smart people say we use 6 to 7% of our brain. I felt like I was using 200% of it. I mean, and I didn't have a brain. My brain was
Yeah.
back on that gurney.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing, floating in this blackness, the peace was so incredible. I know a lot of people talk about the love, but the
Hmm.
predominant thing I felt was peace and comfort, and this enveloping blackness was, it was just comforting. It was like everything about it brought me immense and great comfort. And I, as a writer, I've always struggled with anxiety, ever more so since my husband's messy ending.
Hmm.
And to have that just gone, it wasn't better, it was gone. And so that I remember thinking, I've always wondered what I would look like if I had no anxiety, no fears, no worries, no woes. I mean, this
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah.
And as I'm thinking about this, I thought about a Bible verse, the peace that passeth all understanding. And I thought, this is what Paul was talking about.
Mm.
This is peace that nobody will understand until they experience it. And I thought that was so cool that every memory I had was still with me. In fact, a memory from my infancy came back, which was so neat.
Hmm.
But I remembered again, I'm still floating in this perfect, beautiful, comforting, and comfortable blackness.
Hmm.
I remember I've been here before. Like 59 years ago, I've been here before. And an angel, spiritual being, talked to me and said, yes, your mother, when she told you that you almost died as an infant, in fact, she was in 1959, she was chased out of the hospital, not chased, but asked to leave the hospital because they said, I was a newborn infant at the time. The doctors told her her kidneys have now failed. The rest of her organs will soon follow. She'll be gone in 2 to 4 hours. And
Oh.
they, different world.
Yeah.
But they told my mother, go home and focus on your other children. This one's gone.
Wow.
So the angels told me, they said, yeah, you kind of crossed over then. Explains a lot about why you've always been a little different from the rest of the world. I was like, wow, I wish I'd known that 59 years ago, or at least the last 50. But and then at some point in this floating, I was joined by a massive spiritual being, and I mean massive. And she was above me and slightly to my left. And I turned my head. I felt this presence very succinctly, and I turned my head to the left and looked up, which I thought, I don't know if I have a left shoulder, but I'm I'm looking over something, and but I could not see. And I said, literally, with a lot of joy in my voice, I said, and who are you? Because I'm like, I'm not alone. This is great. And the answer was, you, Rosemary. You are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I thought, whoa, I think that's Genesis 1:27, that we're made in the image and likeness of God. And I thought, that's so cool. And then I also thought, it would have been good to know back then too, but still really, really cool. And more than words, it came with an infusion of knowledge. I'd been familiar with that Bible verse most of my life, and now I feel like I got it. I'm the image and likeness. And then at one point, I guess this was fairly early on, I had the thought, again, I've been a writer and editor for 30 years. I had the thought, you're dying. And then I thought, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And it cracked me up. And I laughed out loud, and I heard myself giggle. I heard myself giggle, and I sound just like I sound all the time. And I thought, wow, I don't have breath sounds. I'm pretty sure I don't have lungs, don't have vocal cords, and yet I sound exactly the same. And that's when I really, boy, was that a big deal to realize. Every single thing that defines us goes with us. Every single thing that makes us uniquely individual, from our memories to the sound of our voice to our bizarre sense of humor. I mean, and then I thought it's kind of funny. Here I'm going to my reward and I'm correcting my tense.
Yeah.
I don't think the angels care if I'm using improper English. And that's when I really pondered, what exactly did I leave behind on that gurney? And I realized only the negative, only the darkness, only the sadness, only the grief. And throughout this experience, and I guess I wish I could share this with the world in the medical field, I kept hearing somebody literally scream my name, Rosemary, Rosemary, and it was panicked, urgent, and loud.
Wow.
And the thing is, if you're in a crowd and somebody screams your name, you can't help but whip your head around and
Right.
see what's happening. I had absolutely no desire to do that. It was like an annoying sound produced by an alarm clock that you wish would just stop. And in retrospect, it took me about a year to really sort that out. I think that in this experience, I had left those old personas behind of mother, author, friend, and I wasn't Rosemary. I was a child of God going home. And so I guess if, I know the medical staff says I know they do that. They call your name, and it turned out that's what it was. It was a nurse
Yeah.
screaming my name, trying to bring me back.
Yeah. I did that when I found my daughter, so I know what that's like. Yeah.
It had no effect. And I don't know what we can say to people. I mean, I don't know what you can say, but I was so disconnected from that. And, an interesting aside as a writer, persona is from the Latin word meaning mask. So we leave that is what we leave behind. We leave the mask behind.
The role that we play when we're here. Yeah.
Right. We really do. So this went on, and if you told me I've been dead for two days, 2 months, I would have easily believed it. And it's hard to imagine in our very linear construct of time that we just love it on Earth.
Yeah.
There is no time. There is, and I'm not even sure it's linear. While I'm describing this in what I believe to be a chronological fashion, who knows? I don't know. I know I know how I remember it. So at some point, it's floating in this blackness, mainly thinking about the peace and the joy. In fact, after I came back from this, one of the first things I did was sit down and make a detailed record of every single thing I remembered, experienced, felt, and said. And as I'm floating in this blackness, I was just so full of joy, like a child. And when I went back and reread my notes, I saw what I had said, and I remember this. I said, wow, I like floating. Floating is fun. This is great.
Wow.
And as a writer, you think I could do something a little more prosaic, a little more loquacious. But yeah, that's what I wrote. And that's one of the reasons I know I had no one. People say, you wanted to come back. No, I did not. I did not. I just, it was so familiar being here. And I knew I was going home. Like the old song, going home, going home. I knew I was going home, just going home, just going home. I was like, wow, I put in my time. And honestly, another thought I had was, I finished the work I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And now I'm done.
Yeah.
And then it is like somebody took my batteries out. I don't know what happened, because one moment I'm floating in this blackness with these angels and spiritual beings with me, and the next thing I'm standing in a white room, and I'm on my feet. I'm no longer floating, and I don't know that I have feet, but I recognize that I'm in this beautiful, brilliantly lit white room. The walls, ceiling, floor is all white. There are no light fixtures. It is the walls and the ceiling and the floor that are producing this luminescent, iridescent, perfect white, brilliant white. So brilliant, it's almost blue. Almost has a bluish tinge, but it was so beautiful. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I have legs or feet, but I think I can move with intention. And at the far end of this room, which wasn't that far away, I saw a door, and I thought, I know what the door is about. I had spent my life, 40 years, I'd been reading about every near-death experience I could find.
Really?
And I recognize now that was part of that experience as a child. But I was fascinated by near-death experiences. And so I knew that door meant it was a border, a boundary, that was the official crossing over. And I was like, out of my way. I know where we're going. I know what we're doing. I can't wait. And in that white room, there was a very fine but thick mist falling, and it was like a very heavy fog, and yet it wasn't deep, it wasn't cold, it wasn't warm. It just felt great. And I remember trying to focus on an individual droplet of this fog, which I know sounds bizarre, but I felt like I ought to be able to see that. I know that I should be able to see that. And this angel with me, accompanying me, said, your eyes have not acclimated to this new experience yet, but each of those droplets are light, and they're itty-bitty bits of light. And when I walked through it, it swirled around me, danced around me. It was so, so beautiful. And what I was told is, when we go to heaven, some people have had a disease process for so long, they believe it's part of their identity. And what happens in this white room, and this was the word I was given, is all of the muck of earth is washed away.
Oh, wow.
And it's washed away by this beautiful light, these little itty-bitty droplets. And as a friend, I shared this with a friend of mine. She said, yep, leave your muddy boots at the door. So that light was unbelievably beautiful. And it swirled. I mean, it was like, this sounds trite, but it sounds like it was all full of joy and happiness, and it was all around me, and it was all great. So I'm moving toward the door, advancing again. I guess I kind of wish I'd looked at my feet. I don't know. But
I've heard other people say that too. It's like, I don't know if I had feet. I didn't bother to look down to see.
I know. It was kind of, not a big deal.
Yeah.
And I moved toward that door, and as I got close to the door, it was shut. And I put my right hand up to push through, because I knew where it went and I was ready. And I paused at the door, and I asked very simply, is this the divine will for my life, that a simple medical mistake takes me out? And I couldn't even get past, is this divine, before the angel answered, the spiritual being that was with me, and said, no, but whatever you decide, if you decide to go back or you decide to go on, you go with all of God's grace and mercy and blessings and care. And that was great. I thought, I'll take that deal. Don't need to ask me again. I'll go. And one of the things I guess I should have mentioned at the beginning, after my husband's death, there were 3 prayers I prayed every night, and sometimes multiple times a day. But the first was, God, either let me die or heal me. I can't do this.
Yeah.
I had learned how to pretend. So I would go out in public and people would say, "How are you doing?" And I thought, be a Hollywood actress. And I would smile and I said, "Oh, I'm doing great. You know, it all worked out. I'm doing fine."
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, when I got home, I would think about, okay, I would review a plan I had for ending my life. I had a very detailed plan, and that brought me comfort. So my daily prayer was either heal me or let me go.
Mm-hmm.
And my other prayer was no life review. And people tend to giggle at that, but that's serious. I had a recurring dream, a nightmare that plagued me for years, 2 years. I wasn't home when my husband ended his life, but in this nightmare, I was just getting home when
Mm.
he grabbed the gun. And I come around the corner as he's putting it in his mouth, and I run to tackle him, but I'm always too late.
Oh,
He pulls
wow.
the trigger. So I had that nightmare too many times to count.
Wow.
And other times I had nightmares about what he looked like afterwards. I mean, it was very intense. So my other prayer was no life review. I'd been through this once. I had lost my mind. I really had lost my mind, behaved very badly in a lot of ways. And then 3, my prayer was, I can't handle any more decisions. After his death, there were a lot of legal messes that had
Yeah.
to be tidied up. And I mean messes that cost thousands of dollars in legal fees. And, you know, the lawyers would say, well, you need to do this or you need to do that, but we need to know. And I just cry. Couldn't take it, couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing, when I was told at the door that whatever you decide, and I was told there are no wrong decisions. And that brought me so much comfort and so much peace. So I'm like, all right, I'm on it. I'll do it.
Yeah.
And I put my right hand up to push through this door, pretty interested by the fact that I'm right-handed in heaven. I mean, I'm right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven. I thought, how cool is that? Even that little detail of my identity has gone on with me. And then I had, shortly before I lost consciousness at that little standalone ER in Suffolk, Virginia, this very kind-hearted nurse, about my age, very motherly, very sweet, very kind eyes. She had been by my side as I was laid out on that gurney, and I grabbed her hand. I said, "Promise me you're not going to let me die." An interesting side effect of bleeding to death. Everyone thinks bleeding to death is, easy. It's messy, and it's terrifying how much blood the human body can hold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's terrifying to see that flow out of yourself and know that people aren't taking you seriously when you say,
Yeah.
"I think I'm bleeding to death." So I grabbed this nurse's, and you become anxious. That's a common side effect, is because your brain isn't working quite like it should. It's not getting quite enough oxygen, so you can't reason things out. I grabbed this nurse's hand in the ER, again, shortly before they gave me that shot, shortly before I passed out, and I said, "Promise me you're not going to let me die." And she's very sweetly, she said, "Oh, honey, we're not going to let you die. We have many solutions for this." I was like, okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So at the door, ready to go on, put my right hand up, ready to take that deal that God has offered, that whatever I decide, I go with all God's grace and mercy and blessings and care.
Wow.
I have a vision of that nurse, and it's a very intense vision. And she is sitting in a hospital supply room on a little metal stool surrounded by linens and other medical supplies. And she's leaning forward on that little stool with her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. And she says through tears, "I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I lost her."
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, "Oh, no, don't do this to me,
Wow.
please." As an empathic person, oh my gosh. And then I thought, well, she's an RN. She's been through this before. She'll get through this.
Yeah. She'll get over it. Yeah.
She'll get over it. And I thought, I need to go more than she needs me here. And then it got ramped up. Then I felt her pain. I felt her agony, and I felt her grief. And I recognized it as the same pain I had known for 29 months after my husband's suicide. And I thought, if my coming back will spare a soul that much pain, I guess I better do that.
Wow.
And I put my right hand down at my side like, oh, crap. But what I said is kind of funny now. I said, "This is going to ruin that woman's day if I die."
Oh, wow. Wow.
And then in a millisecond, I was back in that body. There was no whoosh, there was no return, no tunnel, no nothing. I was back in that body in what seems like a millisecond.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief2growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
With lots of activity going on all around me. They had brought in, my buddy Milton said they brought in everybody, even the receptionist, to work on me. So yeah, there was a lot of activity. They slung me on a gurney and took me out of there.
Wow.
Took me to a real hospital.
So you apparently at the moment when you made the decision that you were going to come back for this nurse's benefit, you were just back. Wow.
Yeah. And miffed. People say, oh, I bet when you woke up, when you were back in your body, you were so grateful. And so I was like, no, I was ticked. I remember looking up at the corner of the room, and I thought, I felt like I could see one of my angels there. And I said, what? Aren't we going to talk about this? Robert's Rules of Order? We had a first. We didn't have a second. We didn't have a discussion. Why? Do you know how much energy it takes to die? It took me hours.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then, people say after they come back from the dead that they feel like they're half in this world and half in that one. I felt like I was 95% in that world and 5% in this one. In fact, the first 24 hours, I knew I was very close to dying again. I felt it. I felt very weird. And I'm not sure if part of that's being stuffed back into the flesh after you've been in a body, or if it's the fact that, I bled to death. The next morning, the doctor affirmed, which was very helpful. Next morning, the doctor comes in to see me at the hospital, and he said, you've had a heart attack. And I said, well, you've got the wrong person. I'm healthy. I bike, I walk, etc. And he said, no, you got a pretty serious heart attack. And I said, what are we talking about? He said, well, you lost more than 40% of your blood volume, and then your heart went into VFib and stopped. So when I heard those first words that said my heart is stopped, it was right. So I said, how? You say I lost more than 40%. I need a number. I guess I'm kind of analytical. Give me a number. He said, well, after 40%, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You died.
Yeah.
So it was pretty dramatic. And then after that, the next 24 hours, I did feel like I was close to death still. And I asked the angels, because I did feel them all around me. I wish I could live in that moment of feeling their presence. And I asked the angels, are we doing this again? What's the plan? It's okay. Either way, just want the plan. Want to know the plan. And the angels said, no, they said, we're healing and fixing things, that there's some more to do with this body. And in 24 hours, I felt that feeling of things being so off had gone, and I started to feel better. And it took some time because, after you tell the doctors, I had to find a new oncologist, by the way. The old one insisted I start chemotherapy as soon as I was healed from this, the chemo and the radiation. And I said, I'm pretty sure I was healed in heaven. And he said, no, we're not. And I said, well, how about if you do another biopsy? He said, no. I said, well, how about if you take another look? Nope. So I had to find another oncologist. And, I was still very excited about all this heaven business. And I said, I died. I went to heaven. I talked to the angels. I got sent back, but it was great. And she said, you bled to death from a cervical biopsy. She was a lot more interested in that than my story of dying.
Yeah.
And ultimately, there was another surgery, and a lot of flesh was taken from a lot of places, and it was affirmed that not one cell of cancer was found. And they biopsied me a lot of different ways. In fact, while I was unconscious, I was on the operating table for more than 3 hours.
Hmm.
While I was unconscious, they did the multiple biopsies and even brought in people to do biopsies in addition to the doctor, so they could look at several slides from several places. Right before the surgery, she said, Rosemary, if I find any cancer anywhere, we're going to take your lymph nodes because we have to see how far this has spread.
Yeah.
And the beauty part, again, my poor buddy Milton, he was waiting out in the waiting room for this surgery, which happened about 8 weeks after my near-death experience. They were very concerned about me being healed.
Okay.
He said the surgeon came through the doors and found him in the waiting room to give him an update on how the surgery went, threw her arms around his neck and said, she's right. There's nothing there. And she said, not only is there nothing there, but her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. I don't think she ever had cancer.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Pretty dramatic.
Yeah. So at some point, were you told that you were going to be healed if you came back?
Yes. I'm sorry. I guess I should have put that in. Yes. At the discussion in the White Room,
Mhm.
I was told if I agreed to come back, I'd be restored to wholeness. And you know, people love the story of being healed of cancer, and I don't want to diminish that in any way. But the healing of my soul, you know, Psalms 23 said, he restoreth my soul.
Mhm.
The healing of the grief and the desire to die and the suicidal ideations,
Sure.
that was gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, I cried a lot the first few days because everything was so beautiful. When I was alone in the hospital room, I had two buddies that were actually three buddies who were kind of tag teaming each other, so I wasn't alone in the hospital room. Because even coming back from this, I was still a little disoriented. An interesting fact, when somebody bleeds to death, you can't even do CPR on them because it just pushes more blood out. So I had no heartbeat, no blood pressure, and no oxygen getting to my brain for more than 10 minutes.
Wow.
So the fact that I came back intact and without significant damage to any organs is pretty dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a miracle in itself. Yeah.
It is. And but when my buddies would have to step out of the hospital room, and you know, sometimes I knew I'd be okay, the angels would come by my hospital bed and sing to me. And they sang me the most beautiful songs and even had music that went with it. And the songs were so beautiful, and I would cry. And I would say, don't stop, but please, you know, overlook the tears. And I said, I want to remember this. I want to write this down. I want to save every word and every note. And I told the angels, I'm not good with melody. I'm not good with lyrics. I don't know that I'm going to be able to remember this. And the angels said, this isn't for you to remember. This is for your healing and your joy and your peace. And honestly, it almost felt like it was a thank you for agreeing to come back. And they knew how hard that was to leave that perfect space. And yet, you know, one of the things that I realized I guess a few weeks ago, when I asked, is this the divine will for my life, as I paused at that door in the White Room, it's because when you're there, all you want to do is glorify God. All you want to do is do what God wants you to do that will bring the most blessing to the most people. And I think that's why I asked that question, because I knew that this didn't really seem like the right thing to die at this point, and yet I wanted to go so badly.
Yeah.
But yes, they did promise they said if you go back, you will go back healed. And you know, the cancer thing, I mean, that's not insignificant. I honestly, at the age of 59, I'd been debating if I'd even do chemo. You know, that was a pretty big decision. But to have my heart and soul healed was massive. It was almost like, it was so fast and so draconian. It was almost like a loving father shaking a child awake that's in the middle of a terrible nightmare.
Wow.
And saying, you were yelling, you were screaming, but it's just a dream.
Wow.
And The healing was that dramatic, and it feels like a dream now. It's not like, oh, my husband. It's crept back in a little bit. I still get sad when I hear about somebody else has killed themselves, or they lose a husband or a wife or child. I
Mm-hmm.
cry, but it's
Yeah.
not the grief that drags me out to sea.
Right.
It's not. It's very different. But yes, it does feel like a father that shook me awake from a bad dream. It feels like another person had that experience. And the Bible says we're a new creation in Christ. I feel all different. In fact, my friend Milton, who witnessed all this, he said, you need to tell him the other part of it, which is, being a baby boomer, loved rock and roll, used to be in radio at the beginning, a million years ago. I did radio stuff and broadcasting. I had some high frequency hearing loss, and I had a busted shoulder and a busted knee. When I came back, all that was gone.
Oh, really? Wow.
My hearing was restored. My busted knee didn't bother me. I'd had shoulder pain for 13, 14 years. It was gone.
Yeah.
And I even had arthritis in my wrist, and when I came back, that was gone as well. So my buddy says you got rebooted by the Creator.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I love the way you put that, being shaken out of a dream. I think that's a really good analogy for our life here. I hear that over and over again, that when you cross back, it's like, that's more real and this feels like a dream. And I think we imagine it the other way around. When we think about it, we're like, that's going to be kind of dream-like and, not really real. So it's always great to hear someone talk about the solidness of it, the reality of it, and the intensity, I guess, of it.
As I said, I had the greatest mental clarity I have ever known. I felt like everything had been awakened again. I guess there's that phrase again, but his death was, I'm an architectural historian by trade, and that house we had lived in was my dream home. It was a beautiful house in a beautiful place.
Mm.
And so the losses, the ancillary losses, I lost all our friends. There's a big difference between being friends with the big deal litigator and the author and being friends with this wash rag of a pathetic individual who can't eat food anymore. So yeah, everything that was my former life got burned down. There was nothing left of the old life. But when I came back, I I realized my life had been pretty of a fraud, really. I had not been happy. I'd been pretending to be happy, hoping that if I pretended hard enough, I'd grow into it.
Yeah.
And that wasn't happening. And I had been praying. Oh my, did I pray? I read the Bible. I prayed every night. And I had affirmations taped all over my house, trying to pull myself out of this pit.
Yeah, you were fighting hard.
Oh boy, was I! I had affirmations in my car. When I came back from this, I thought I need to change some things. So I had one of the largest private collections of ephemera in my niche topic of architecture in the world, and I donated it to a college library.
Oh.
I started selling off all my worldly possessions one by one, and I sold off heirlooms that had been in my family for a couple generations or more. Mm-hmm. And with each thing, though, it was really cool. With each thing, I thought, wow, I've really enjoyed this item. And I would stand over it and I would say a prayer, and I would just say, God, this thing has been such a blessing. It has brought me so much joy. But now can you please bring the person that it will bless for the next decade or lifetime?
So
and then
cool.
Invariably, these things sold very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then my friends, it's kind of funny now. I had two friends say, are you getting ready to kill yourself because you're getting rid of everything? I said, no.
Yeah,
that
just
was
the opposite.
I found peace because I learned, and I, in my own heart, I knew that if I told anybody, before all this happened, that I was thinking of ending my life, people would intervene. Yeah. So I knew to keep my mouth shut if I was going to do this. And that's, again, I guess goes back to suicide prevention.
And that's a really great point that I really want to bring out, because a lot of people listening have had children. I have a lot of parents that listen have had children cross due to suicide. And one of the first things we want to do is blame ourselves. And in your case, your husband actually said it was your fault. So did you take that guilt on?
Terribly so.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think if one could quantify such things, 50% of the pain was the suicide and also the violence with which he ended his life. 50% was that I figured he was right. And, it's, I moved to the Midwest. After I sold everything, I sold my car, sold my house, bought a used Prius, moved 1,000 miles due west in a used Prius. I started a new life, but I had saved some things from my old life. The kids' paperwork and my life was in boxes, and that's fine. There's trinkets and treasures that I had saved. I opened up one of these boxes, and it was a collection of some little goofy thing I had. And my very first thought, no wonder he killed himself. He bought all this crap. And then I was like, wow, we're still talking about that? We're still dealing with that?
Yeah.
So that crept up out of somewhere. And I had to stop. I was in the middle of, opening up and unpacking some. I dropped it. And I went to a room and I calmed myself down and I thought, no. That's the old script. That's the old Rosemary. Those are the old lies.
Yeah.
That's the old nightmare.
There's lies.
That's not the truth. So 50% of the pain was from the suicide, and I'd say 50% was I'm empathic, I'm a mother, I'm prone to a lot of guilt anyway.
Yeah.
But man, that just did me in.
The thing is, you now know it from both sides. You know it from having experienced your husband taking his life and you having this suicidal ideation. And you realize that if you really want to do this, there's no one that's going to stop you.
Right. That's the takeaway. And his leaving that note was he had a very successful career as an attorney. And I think it was a mechanism that made sense to him that he wouldn't be held, guilty, liable, I can't think of the right word. It wouldn't be his problem. It was me that did it.
Yeah.
And it worked. Oh boy, did it work. And looking back, it was kind of nuts that I spent 2.5 years in that community because I should have left immediately, but I didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't have the spiritual resources. Moving is tough.
Yeah. And grief takes everything out of you to begin with. And you complicate the grief with the guilt, and it just drains you. You don't have any energy to do anything.
It did. In fact, even moving when I did, my buddy Milton, that's his name, he was a great blessing in helping me get out of one house. And it's been 2 years. It was September 5th, 2018, that I went to heaven and had a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And it was great, but I haven't missed anything. None of that stuff I sold, haven't missed it a bit.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. I thought, oh, you may regret this. I mean, I sold the house. I sold the car. That car was really nice. And I live in a spare bedroom, which has been a real blessing. It was actually a family member who had lost his wife. So he's got a great big house, and I really like living simply.
Yeah.
And it's also a smaller environmental footprint. I mean, this thing of everyone living in 5,000 square feet is nuts.
Yeah. It's really interesting, Rosemary. When people have these experiences, there's some commonalities. They're not universal, but some commonalities they come back with. And one of them is this: you lose your attachment to physical objects.
Yes.
You start giving things away, selling things, living more simply, because you realize what's really important in life is not these big complicated things that we make important. So you had a total, I read this the other day, I forgot. Oh, it's Deborah Diamond that said it. She said, it's not like you come back as a 2.0, you come back like as a 20.0
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah. You just come back as a different person. You had mentioned when you gave me some notes at the beginning that Milton had an experience when you had your experience. So tell me about that.
This is so cool. And it's funny what people latch on to. And very briefly, I want to back up. One of the things the angels told me was, and this was after I was in that hospital, because I was on total bed rest for 4 days in the hospital. They were trying to make sure I didn't die again.
Yeah.
They said that the stuff Wayne had done and left behind in the messies and all that, the message, they said it had been encapsulated. And I'm an architectural historian, and that's what you do with potential toxic contaminants. You encapsulate, because removing them tends to stir up more dust or
Oh, really?
particulate
Okay.
matter,
Uh-huh.
like asbestos. The current accepted means for dealing with asbestos in a home or even commercial property is you wrap it up, you pretty much hermetically seal it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's considered superior or more advantageous, because in taking it down, you disturb it so much it spreads everywhere. So the fact that the angels use that word encapsulated, I thought, oh my gosh, that's great. They're speaking my language.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they said everything had been encapsulated, and that it was a thing and it was there, but it could not hurt me. It could not harm me anymore. And then because I asked him a lot of questions. That's the thing about suicide. It is a death like no other, and there's so many questions. But I said, why did?
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions was, oh my goodness, there were so many. But where is he now?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, none of your business. And I said, wait, what? I prayed for this man. I prayed for this man 3 times a day. What do you mean, none of my business? And they said, we are to work out our own salvation. You're not to work out his. And they said, you did the things you were supposed to do. You prayed for him. You saw him surrounded by light and love every day, which was my practice, my
Mm-hmm.
habit. So there were a lot of questions. And the beauty part of these questions was that before this, I had just been ruminating on these questions. How could he do this? I thought he loved me. Where is he now? What's happened to him? Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. On and on and on and
Yeah.
on and on. And this took me out of that circling. As the Bible says, you've circled the mountain long enough, time to stop and go north. This took me out of the circling. And so I stopped asking these questions because I had my answers, and it was
Yeah.
such a blessing. But as to Milton, so after they gave me this shot of Dilaudid in the little ER, and stuffed me, they walk out because the blood isn't showing up anymore. Problem solved.
Yeah.
And then so Milton stayed with me, sees my blood pressure go 32/25, and then sees me reach up to heaven, and then plop back down, and then the blood pressure goes to air. He said it was about, because he's former military, he's got some pretty good training. He said it was about 2 minutes before the nurse showed back up, because they think I'm just sleeping. And he said when they come back in the room, they fiddled with the cuff, and then they fiddled with the electrical plug into the wall. They thought, well, this thing stopped working.
Oh, wow.
No
Wow.
thought that the human stopped working.
Yeah.
So but he did get ushered out into the room. They did a sternum rub, which I had not heard of before, but apparently it's where a nurse rakes their little knuckles right over your center of your chest.
Yeah.
Apparently, if there's any life there, it'll elicit some sort of pain response.
Mm-hmm.
And he said they did that pretty hard, pretty regular, several times. And he said you didn't flinch. So then they summon the doctor in, and then they shove him out. They shoo him out into the hall because now they realize they have an issue. So while he's standing there, he said he was thinking, she's dead. For 29 months, I've tried to keep her alive. Because my buddy Milton was the one who found my husband's body.
Oh.
So what a pair of messy bookends,
Yeah.
First, the husband does this, and then the wife bleeds to death.
Wow. Yeah.
So he's out in the hallway, right outside the room. And I tell people he was hit by the blast radius, which I think is actually true. And prior to this, Milton had been a very proud, avowed, clear atheist. He actually subscribed to a magazine called American Atheist. And when it would come in the mail, he'd very proudly show it to me. Look, good writing.
Oh, wow.
And say, you keep that to yourself.
Yeah.
So that's Milton's background. And while he's out in that hallway, he said an angel came to him and said, you don't need to worry. We just need her for a few minutes. She'll be right back.
Wow.
And the thing was, he didn't think to himself, wait a second, I don't believe in angels. And he said it came with a feeling that somebody had wrapped a warm blanket of love and peace and joy around him. He said he just felt enveloped by this peace. And so he said it came with this feeling and with these words, and it changed him. And so after he hears this, he goes out to the lobby. he leaves his spot by the door. He goes out to the lobby and gets a soda. And I said, "You what?" It
Wow.
wasn't like I was in there for, blood work or a strep throat
Right.
test. I
Yeah.
just died. You saw it. You saw the whole thing. He said, "Well, I was thirsty. Been a long day."
Wow.
So he went out there, and then he had a soda. And he came back to the room. He came back and, again, stood outside the hallway. And he said, "Yeah, I was just waiting for you to come back. I knew you'd be back." I was
Wow.
like, wow. So, what's interesting is after he said while he was standing there, 4 times the door to that small room opened, and they emerged carrying linens literally soaked in blood. So the point is, I continued to bleed. And once they apparently removed that gauze, they saw how much I had continued to bleed. So it's been 2 years for Milton, and he actually, it was just a few days after I was back home from the hospital, and we were in my house, and I was flopped out on my couch, and Milton was there. His sister was there sitting in a chair opposite the couch, and Milton shares this story about the angel that came to him in the hallway.
Really?
And we're like, "Oh, yeah," we're like, "Oh, do go on."
Oh, wow.
The very proud atheist is telling us about an angel visitation in a hospital and a feeling of being ensconced in love and peace and joy. And he's telling about it. I said, "So what did this do to your belief system?"
Yeah.
And he said, "It shattered every single thing I've ever believed."
Really?
And his sister, who was sitting right there, she was very quiet. She leaned forward and, choking back emotion, she said, "Brother, I've been praying for you for 30 years that you would find out about God." So it was a pretty big deal. So now Milton, when he finds a Bible passage that he thinks is relevant to some challenge I'm having, he'll text it to me, or he'll
Really?
call me, or
Wow.
he'll copy it on the copier and hand it to me. So yes, this has changed him. Milton and I are still very close friends, and I will call him sometimes and say, "Help me remember something," and it's amazing how this has changed him in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And in the early days, I thought, "Why am I back? Why am I back? I didn't want to come back. I still want to be there. It was so beautiful there. Why did I come back?" And I think, well, maybe if the reason I came back was for Milton, that's a pretty big reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are probably multiple reasons why you came back, but it's really that's really cool, that collateral damage or collateral beauty of like you said, Milton getting hit by the blast radius. It's a cool
Collateral
aspect.
damage.
Yeah. So we were talking before we start recording, and I know some people have said to you, and we were talking about a mutual friend of ours also who had a near-death experience, and people are saying, you're being deceived. You're deceiving people.
Oh,
Not only
yeah.
you're being deceived, but you're out. Why are you telling people these stories? And I've heard you refer to the Bible over and over again. So I'm going to assume that you are a religious person that believed in God and believed in the Bible. So what is the deal with these people that think that you're being deceived? What do you think about that?
I just started sharing this story a couple of years. Well, it's been 2 years since it happened. I started sharing about a year ago.
Right.
Immediately, you were in hell. Those were demons on the other side of the door. It's good you came back. You get a second chance at salvation. I'm like, I don't think that was hell. I don't think those were demons. I think there was something in the Bible about the disciples were told to put down their fishing nets, sell everything they have, and to follow Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'm not trying to accumulate more stuff. My goal and my big goal is to share this. Gospel means good news, and
Right.
I think this is good news.
I think it's,
and
yeah.
I know it encourages a lot of people. So those people, because there's two. There's the atheist who say it's the brain shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then you want to talk about the stage 2 cancer that had advanced to a point that it had distorted the flesh. It's just simply gone. You want to talk about that? How does that happen? You want to tell me about that one? Because they say, well, and then, I met oh my goodness, what are they called? Neuropsychologist or something. Her background is in neurology and psychology, and there's a fancy word that eludes me right now. She actually took a detour from Iowa to come meet me here in southwestern Illinois because she said the most compelling part of these NDE stories is not the bright light and the encounter with spiritual beings. She said, but the fact that when people come back from these, they've changed their entire life.
Exactly.
And so I want to hear what you did.
Yeah.
And I told her, and she said, the most believable part of your story to me is these changes take a human being years, decades, or perhaps in a lifetime to make these substantive changes. And she said, you were completely changed from the DNA up.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that. Everything, my gosh, I was somewhere driving yesterday, and I saw, I think it was just the sun setting, and I burst into tears. I thought, it's so beautiful. It's just all so beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's a brave new world for me. So I don't know. There's a story of Annabelle Beam. Have you ever heard of her?
I don't think so. No.
Little kid, I think she was 10, fell into a hollow cottonwood tree. And she had a life-threatening illness when this fall took place. And while there, the angels came, Jesus appeared to her and said, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And they took her to heaven and, gave her a nice little tour. And it took them 5 hours to rescue this kid out of this hollowed out, rotted tree. She was up on a branch or something.
Yeah. I have heard that story. Yeah.
When she came, Annabelle Beam, when she came back, she was healed. She talked about heaven and the angels and seeing Jesus, but she was also healed of this life-threatening disease instantaneously. And her mother was frustrated that people weren't believing this story. They thought that some part of it was contrived or made up. And Annabelle told her mother, she said, it's okay, Mom. There'll be a day when they believe and they understand.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at.
It'll come for all of us at some point, but I think it's fascinating. I like that you touched on. We've got the materialist, the atheist that says this is all fake, and then we've got the religious people that say, well, it's all a deceit. And I'm like, okay, so Satan, when he deceives us, is going to tell us, I want you to spread a message of love, peace, light, joy, hope, generosity. I want you to go out and live a better life, and then when you come here, I'm going to put you in hell.
That's a really good point.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of it like that.
Yeah, I'm like, to me, it's like, okay, the Bible says you judge a tree by its fruits. So what do people that have NDEs do when they come back? Are they out trying to make a lot of money? Are they trying to accumulate more things? What are they actually doing? What's the message that they're spreading? And they're spreading the same message that Jesus spread. So yeah, it's really interesting to me how people on both ends of the spectrum say it's all crazy, but I really appreciate you sharing it. And I know you're working on a book to tell your story, right?
Yes, I am. And when this first happened, I declared boldly and repeatedly, as the author of 9 books, which have taken years to write, and they're about historic architecture and require a lot of research. Writing is not a fun thing. And this, boy, talk about a different genre to go from historic architecture to having seen heaven. So in the beginning, I declared I would not write a book. And then after I started giving a few talks, people said, please write a book. And then I had a YouTube video that somebody recorded actually Roberta Moore recorded at an IANDS conference. And that little bit of YouTube video has had 46,000 hits, which shocked me. And the comments, there are days I wonder, what am I doing here? I want to be there. I don't want to be here. But reading those comments are a great blessing. And I'd say a lot of them are from people who've lost somebody to suicide. And if there is one message I have for the world, if you lose someone to suicide, there's nothing you could have done to make it happen. There's nothing you could have done to stop it.
Yeah.
When they get to that point, you are just not that powerful. You just don't have that big a presence in their mind, in their heart. So yeah, it's a lot of people. It's parents also of somebody of a child that's ended their life, and they also want to know, where is my child? What are they experiencing? Are they in hell? And that's probably my most frequently asked question: is, do suicides go to hell? And in my opinion, I believe it's known, it's documented. Roughly 90% of suicides are mental illness related. 10% are either of a criminal nature or revenge related. In other words, I'll get you. You took away my kids, or you took away this or that. I'll show you. This will finish you off. And then some are, somebody gets caught doing something bad, and they don't want to pay the consequences. So my point is 90% of suicides are connected to mental illness. When somebody has a heart attack, we don't say, wow, look what the wife did. She's probably just giving them too much butter at dinner.
Right.
But a brain attack, I don't see a big difference between your brain going bad and your heart going bad. I really don't. So did suicides go to heaven? Yeah. I do think they maybe spend more time in the white room. Seriously, I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard some mediums talk about, and this is kind of controversial too, because some people say as soon as we cross over, all of our burdens are gone and we're right back to where we were. but I've heard several mediums say there's like a hospital-like setting, or there may be some sort of counseling or something to get that person, back in the right frame of mind. And, these things might be metaphors. So you saw a white room with this mist that was a healing type of thing. When we've been in that state for so long in this body, we've got to kind of wash that stuff away. I think it's a really great metaphor.
Yes. And suicide is just so damaging. One of my dreams, and it's a big dream, is so typical of suicide that even law enforcement looks to the spouse. And it's not uncommon for the spouse to become the lead suspect in what they consider a homicide investigation when somebody turns up dead, even if it's suicide. And I was questioned by the cops, and fortunately it was brief, and it was by phone. They asked me the specific words. They called me on the phone because I was trying to get home from Boston. We lived in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And the cops called me and said, "We need to know the nature of your last argument with him." And I said, "I just got a call that my husband blew out his brains. I do not feel that this is an appropriate time, and I do not feel this is an appropriate question."
Yeah.
I'm kind of amazed, given all the circumstances. I had the wherewithal to do that. But if I could wave a magic wand, I would create an organization or foundation or something that would provide advocacy and victim assistance to women who've just found their husbands hanging in a garage or drowned in the backyard or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it is, it was only, 50 years ago that when a woman was raped, the question was, what were you wearing? Where were you? What were you doing? Did you say something to him? And we're still doing that with suicides. We need to have some kind of advocacy program in place that when a woman is sat down, when she just finds out her husband did this, and questioned by the police, well, where were you when this happened? Do you own a gun? What had you been talking about before he did this?
Yeah.
That is wildly inappropriate. Wildly. So I wish there was a way to solve that problem.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point. And I think just in a broader point, we talked to this, I think, before we started recording, however we cross over, whether it's suicide or murder or heart attack or cancer or whatever, we're all going to go home at some point. And we take these certain things, especially suicide, and we attach stigma to them, to the person who actually committed the act or who did the act of killing themselves, and also to the family. A lot of times, whether it's a parent or a spouse or whatever, what did you know? Surely there was some sign, something that you missed. There's something that you should have done. And people might not say it in those words, but that's kind of the underlying tone I think a lot of people have. And so I think what you're telling a story is so important to tell people. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's what someone else does is never your fault.
It isn't. And I as I mentioned, I can't remember if we talked about this before or after we started recording, but I did go to one suicide support group, and it was primarily parents, but there was one woman a little older than me, and she said to the group, my son would still be alive if he hadn't married that woman. And I was like, all right, we're done. I'm not going to listen to this anymore. Yeah. And I get it. Part of it is with people who have not experienced trauma, because my husband's visitation after he did this was closed casket. And yet we had the casket behind us, and then people walk up towards you and give their condolences. Well, you see the couples, as they approach the casket, squeeze each other a little tighter, hold each other a little closer, and then they say, and this is one of those things that you should never say to a widow of any kind, they say, oh, if anything happened to Robbie, I'd just lay down and die.
Yes.
And you think, oh, so I didn't love him as much as you love your husband.
Yes.
Thanks, got it. And I also, people ask, did he leave a note? And the thing with that, I realized, took me a while to figure this out. They're trying to make sure that this level of horror never infiltrates their life. They want to figure out, okay, she screwed up, but I'm not going to let that happen in my life.
Exactly.
That makes me angry.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's very common.
It is very common, and I find that also when children pass, by any means, people they ask all these questions because they want to insulate themselves from it. They want to make sure, well, this would never happen to my child, and this will never happen to me, because this only happens to other people until it doesn't. It can happen to any of us, and I think it's very important that people like yourself that have experienced this speak out and say, okay, don't say these things to people. This is not helpful. You think you're being helpful and people say the same thing. Well, if my child ever, passed, or my child died, I couldn't go on. I couldn't live. And, I felt that way. I mean, I think we all do, but we all have to do what we have to do to get through. And we have a reason for being here. And so it doesn't help when someone tells you that. That's not helpful at all.
No. And I've learned this too, until somebody has gone through this kind of trauma, they are clueless. You
Mhm.
cannot realize what this does to your brain.
Yeah.
See, I always put great stock in the fact that I consider myself really smart. And after this, it was more like I had had a stroke.
Hmm.
I lost the ability to read. For a couple months, I couldn't even drive. I had to have a friend drive me
Yeah.
places.
It literally damages your brain.
It
Yeah.
does. And I
Yeah.
remember a year out, as I mentioned, my buddy Milton was sharing a rental home with me. One, for finances, helps a lot to have a roommate. But I decided, okay, it's been a year, I'm going to try to cook. And I grabbed a cake box mix. And I thought, okay, this is pretty simple. And I read the ingredients, and I think it was like 2 eggs and some oil and some water and something else. And I couldn't grasp it. I
Hmm.
couldn't read a recipe.
Hmm.
And I got so angry and then frustrated, and I cried, and I handed it to him. And I said, it's telling me to do something, but I can't figure this out. It doesn't make sense. Help me. And he took over and he did it.
Yeah.
I've written 9 books, and I couldn't read the recipe on the back of a cake mix.
Yeah.
And that's what trauma does to your brain. So these people say, well, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and focus on the good and all this other stuff. They are clueless.
Yeah. It takes everything out of you. But the other thing is amazing is how resilient the human spirit is. And people say, well, I could never do it. And I'm like, you could, you just don't know it because you haven't been put in that position yet. But humans, we find a way to get through. And as long as we have hope, we'll find a way. So I appreciate you really saying that, because it's a very common thing when we go through these traumas, and people don't realize, how it just drains everything out of you.
It does. And people have often said, oh, you're strong. And I say, I consider that a foul word. I say, do not call me strong.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, resilient is the word I allow. I am not strong. I did not want this. Every day I thank God for this man. Every day I knew, I don't know. Every day I knew that he was, I thought he was the man for whom I had prayed for years.
Yeah.
So not strong, resilient, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've been about an hour, so I really appreciate you doing this, Rose. It's been a pleasure, talking to you again. I think your what you've been through is going to help so many people. I can't wait till the book comes out. Maybe you'll come back and we can do another interview then.
Well, thank you very much.
Anything you want to say before we close today?
Just that, that's a really good question. Just that if you find somebody suffering from the loss of a child or a spouse to suicide, the best thing you can do is show up and shut up. Do not tell about your uncle's brother's father's cousin's son who killed himself, so you know just what they're going through. Don't liken it to anything in your experience, because suicide is a death like no other. So yeah, that is the advice I would share: is show up and shut up. Hug them, hold them while they sob. I used to do something my daughter called the pterodactyl scream. In the early days, I would just sit on the couch and scream.
Yeah.
And people think they say, oh, be quiet, stop. You're upsetting the dog.
Yeah, you got to let it out. You got to
Yes.
feel all those feelings. Well, thanks, Rose. It's been great talking to you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.